And let me share my screen. And there we are. So before I get started, I would like to have everyone just go in the chat box. You don't have to give me your name. I see most of you are on iPhones just coming in, but tell me where you're from and tell me if you are a Parkinson's patient or if you are a family or loved one of somebody with Parkinson's. I'm here tonight from Florida. I'm in Ocala, Florida. It's cold for us. It's down in it's going to get down in the 20s tonight. It was in the 20s last night. I know that's not cold nationwide. I know we're going through a horrible, horrible cold front. Um, so the topic tonight is Parkinson's beyond dopamine. We know that dopamine is the key to Parkinson's disease, but I think there's a role with oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction that really plays into the role of Parkinson's disease. So what we're going to cover tonight is a short introduction. We're going to talk about what is Parkinson's disease, what are the treatment options that are out there. We're going to talk a little bit about the statistics and numbers. And then I like to go back to 1975, and we'll talk about some changes that happened in the early 1970s that I really think changed the scope of medicine today, really in a bad way. And we'll talk more about that. This is me. I practiced initially orthopedic surgery. I did conventional orthopedics up until 2009. When I got tired of the insurance companies and when I got tired of the traditional medicine. At that point, I went into regenerative orthopedics and functional medicine. I now serve on the scientific advisory board for a major nutrigenomic company, as well as other boards around the country. A small disclaimer before we get started that everything I'm going to talk about tonight is for educational purposes only. It's not intended to treat, cure, prevent, or any diseases. It should not be considered as medical advice or a substitute for a consultation with a qualified healthcare professional. You'll always need to speak to your physician before starting, stopping, or changing any treatments or medications, and results may vary. So if you're here tonight, I'm sure that you already know about Parkinson's disease. You already know what the cause is or what the projected causes in traditional medicine. And I think that differs when you look at things from a traditional medicine viewpoint or you look at things from a functional medicine viewpoint. But in traditional medicine, the etiology or the cause of Parkinson's disease is the loss of dopaminergic neurons in an area of the brain called the substantia nigra. What that means is that it's no longer making dopamine. And dopamine is what causes the signal in your brain to go out to the motor neurons of your body to cause you to walk, to cause you to move your hands, to pick up something. And this loss of dopamine causes tremors, rigidity, slow gait, and postural instability. And then there's some non-motor things that happen as well. Things like fatigue and constipation and depression, cognitive decline, sleep disorders. But my feeling is that Parkinson is not just a dopamine deficiency. It's a long-term regenerative process. And I don't think it actually started just in the substantia nigra. Now, if we look at the brain, and I think it's important to just kind of know, in the center portion of the brain is where the substantia nigra is. This is what's making the dopamine. And right next to that, the blue and the green area is what is called the basal ganglia. And that is where a lot of the motor effects start. But it's interesting that a lot of times the motor effects are secondary. There's some symptoms that occur early on that we don't even notice as Parkinson's symptoms. And a lot of that is with the gut, and a lot of it starts with constipation. But I want to talk about what some of the initiating and contributing factors are to start the process of Parkinson's disease, because it doesn't just start when you have problems with your gait and you start shuffling your feet and you start rolling your hands. that's not the beginning. It's multifactorial and it's not all genetic. A matter of fact, we can only link about 10 to 15% of Parkinson's diagnosis to a genetic defect. It's not just aging. There's some genetic susceptibility, like I said, about up to about 15%. But I think what really plays a role are environmental toxins, chronic inflammation, dysfunction of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the little cell powerhouses inside the cell that generate cellular energy or something that's called ATP, and then oxidative stress. I think the dopamine loss is just the end result of some initiating factors. And that's what I think the biggest problem with treatment is. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this call tonight. It's multifactorial, just like Parkinson's disease. My dad had Parkinson's disease in the late 1970s into the early 1980s. He lived into the 1990s and died young, died in his mid 60s. I then, about 15 or 20 years ago, I developed an essential tremor. Initially, I thought maybe it was Parkinson's, but it wasn't. It was more of an intention tremor. And then one of my best friends here in Ocala, Florida, developed Parkinson's, and I watched him develop and progress before my eyes. And that's when I started taking even a more interest in what's causing it, because I didn't think the medications were enough for him. And we've actually been able to change some of the course. There's some very famous people with Parkinson's. We know that Ozzy Osbourne just passed away not that long ago with Parkinson's. We all know Michael J. Fox. How his struggle has been with Parkinson's. Alan Alda has Parkinson's. So it has been really been brought to the forefront in the media because of some people like that. So treatment right now is dopamine centered. It means that we give dopamine replacement. Early on, it's just carbidopa and levodopa. There's some new drugs out that help produce and increase dopamine production. But dopamine replacement does not cause neuron protection. All we're doing is supplementing the body with dopamine. Progression of dose increases over time. You can start out with a low dose. Over time, you're going to need a bigger and bigger dose. Motor fluctuations and dyskinesias increase over time. The problem with this treatment of treating just with dopamine, that motor fluctuations do not necessarily completely go away. The dopamine treatment does not address things like mitochondrial health, oxidative damage, neuroinflammation, and folding of proteins. There's some proteins called synuclein, and those proteins fold over and they cause something in your brain called Lewy bodies. And you may have heard Lewy bodies associated with dementia, and they are Lewy body dementia. But this also happens in Parkinson's. So treating with dopamine without addressing the cellular stress is just symptom management. It's not disease modifications. If we look at other diseases, we look at things like rheumatoid arthritis, or we look at some of the autoimmune diseases, we have disease modification drugs that actually modify the disease. We're not really seeing that very well with Parkinson's. They're looking at some new drugs that lead down that road. Let's talk about the incidence. What I want to talk about, Parkinson's by the numbers then and now. I like to go back to 1975. 1975 was, I think, a key year, and it just happens to be 50 years ago. So in 1975, the incidence of Parkinson's disease was about 50 cases in 100,000 people. Today, it's over 200 cases per 100,000, over 1.2 million cases nationwide. That's a fourfold or a 400% increase in less than 50 years. Genetics can't change that fast. So we can't say it's increasing because of genetic possibility. So what else has changed between 1975 and today? Why is this a time that I think is key to medicine? Now, in 1975, I would have been about 13 years old. 1971, I think, is when this all started. 1971 was a pivotal moment in public health. That's because the Marlboro Man was no longer allowed on TV. This is a cigarette ad. We had cigarette commercials. 1971, the cigarette ads went away. When cigarette ads were removed from television, tobacco companies started seeing a loss in profit. It was the same time that the black box warning was also placed on cigarettes saying that they can cause cancer. The tobacco companies had to look for profit. So they pivoted from tobacco to food. R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco. Philip Morris bought General Mills. So the scientists that were working on tobacco addiction, one of those actually was my older brother, that's 15 years older than me, now switched over to using that science to make food addicting into food engineering. It was maximizing cravings, consumption, and repetitive behavior for foods. It's when we started seeing breakfast cereals. It's when we started seeing Oreos, when we started seeing Goldfish, when we started seeing Pringles. Put a number two in the chat box if you can eat just one Pringle. It's impossible. And the food scientists have made it that way. So, what are the key changes that happened at that time? We've had a lot of environmental changes and we had a lot of diet changes. Starting in the mid 70s, after big tobacco went to big food, we had a rise in ultra high processed foods. Prior to this, we were eating mostly stuff that was grown or raised close to your home within 50 to 100 miles. If it was winter and you were up north, you didn't get oranges. You had to go to canned foods and vegetables. It was the rise of breakfast cereals. It was the rise of things like Pop-Tarts. The companies could now advertise to children, and they did often on Saturday morning cartoons. We had increased sugar, we had increased refined carbohydrates, we had increased seed oils. We had increased food additives, chemicals that were added to our food to increase consumption. We also had the increase in plastic containers. Things were now coming into plastic containers, and we had an increased microplastic load in our body. Today, that microplastic load is the size of a credit card. The size of a credit card is what you consume in microplastics in just 1 week. Those microplastics then get into our bodies. We have done cadaver dissections. Actually, a great study. My original background was orthopedic surgery. They've done a study. They did a test where they had orthopedic surgeons taking lymph nodes out of the groin during the surgeries. They were sending them off to pathology, and they were able to find plastic particles inside of those lymph nodes. So they're not just going into our digestive tract, they're getting absorbed into our body and into our circulation. Here's some parallel diseases that also trended since 1975. Autism in 1975 was 1 in 10,000. It's now 1 in 31. Obesity, 10% in 1975, up to 42% nationally. And this is the first year, 2025 was the first year that we had 5 states go over 50% in obesity rate. Now we're talking about obesity, meaning greater than 30% of your ideal body weight. Overweight in the United States is 82% of the American population. Pediatric cancers went from 0.2% to 1.8%. Premature menopause went from being rare to very common. Testosterone deficiency in men went from rare to very common. Parkinson's disease, as I said earlier, a fourfold increase. It went up over 400% since 1975. There's really only one thing that changed over that period of time. That was the increased chemicals that were added to the foods that we eat, to the farms where our fruits and vegetables were, into the fertilizers, and then the increase of ultra high processed foods. What does that mean? What is the common denominator? Well, all of those chemicals, everything that's in the ultra high processed foods, increases something in our body called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is essentially our cells rusting prematurely. When they're exposed to free radicals, then those cells start to die off. This is what's happening in the substantia nigra in Parkinson's disease. The neurons that produce dopamine begin to die off. They're being attacked by these free radicals. These free radicals lead to chronic inflammation. They lead to the buildup of toxins. They lead to insulin resistance, and they break down the microbiome of our guts, and they cause dysbiosis. Then they start attacking the cells in our body. They attack the lipids. The lipids are what line our nerves. It's the coating or what's called the myelin sheath over our nerves. This leads to neurodegenerative disease. It causes these proteins that are in the brain that cause Lewy bodies to start folding early. This is what leads to dementia and the dementia of Parkinson's, as well as some of the motor functions. It starts affecting our DNA. So we're more susceptible to maybe a genetic deficiency that we have. We now start seeing the body acting on that genetic deficiency. And then our mitochondria, the powerhouses inside of our cells, stop functioning. Our cells have less energy, and we start seeing that in disease. If you go onto PubMed and you Google oxidative stress slash diseases, over 220 diseases come up that are linked to oxidative stress. There are more than 10 different articles that link oxidative stress to Parkinson's disease. And I have those articles. At the end of the talk, I'm going to give you my personal email address, and you can email me a request, and I will send you the breakdown of those articles with a review to show you why I think this is important to treat. Not just add dopamine to the body, but treat the actual root cause. So here's the big picture. Mitochondrial dysfunction causes energy collapse at a cellular level. This causes decreased production of things like dopamine. These protein misfoldings and aggregations build up, especially in our brain, causing these Lewy bodies to form, leading to increased symptoms in dementia and increased symptoms in Parkinson's disease. And then we get neuroinflammation. Our nerves start becoming inflamed. This is leading to things like ALS. It's leading to things like Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's disease from this neuroinflammation. The neuroinflammation is a direct reaction from the oxidative damage that's caused in the microglia part of the cells in the brain. And these release their own inflammatory cytokines, which start attacking our own brain tissue. The dopamine loss is only the visual outcome of what we see. We see the decreased dopamine, we see the ataxic gait, we see the pill rolling in the hands, but that's not the root cause. The root cause is not just the loss of dopamine. Something is triggering that, and that is this oxidative stress. Now, we know what's happening in the brain, but it's not just happening in the brain. It's also happening in the gut. There's something called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is important in something called the gut-brain axis. And that gut-brain axis is important in Parkinson's disease. And here's why. Over 50% of the body's total dopamine is generated in the gastrointestinal tract. It's interesting, almost 90% of the feel-good hormone, serotonin, is also manufactured in the digestive tract. Only 10% is made in the brain. So I have a hypothesis that a lot of the depression that we see today is starting in our gut and not actually starting in our brain. The gut contains about 70% of our immune system. So chronic gut inflammation causes systemic inflammation. Inflammatory signals then can cross from the gut, can cross into the blood-brain barrier. And that's why I think a lot of early Parkinson's patients, before they even have the ataxic gait, before they have the hand tremors, they see some constipation, they see some bloating, they see some problems with digestion and this dysbiosis. This often occur years before we see the motor symptoms. And when I was actively practicing, I've retired now a little over a year ago, mostly doing research and mostly teaching other doctors. But we would have people come in with constipation issues, and we would have to address those early. And some of those patients did go on to develop Parkinson's disease, despite us actively treating their oxidative stress. Now, this oxidative stress and the gut barrier caused by the breakdown of the ultra-high processed foods, caused by the microplastics in the water bottles, in the plastic cutting boards, in the plastic packaging, in the food we eat. Microplastics and gut have a big thing because in our gut, we have something called tight junctions. Tight junctions are tiny little gaps between the cells that line our gut. And when these tight junctions open up, we get what's called leaky gut. Now, the toxins from our gut can get into our circulatory system and they can go throughout our body. That's what leaky gut is. Now, we can also get these microplastics. They attack these tight junctions and open them up. That's why we're seeing these plastic particles in lymph nodes and in our spleen. And that's why we're having such huge problems with inflammation and oxidative stress. This leads to activation of our immune system. It leads to autoimmune disease, things like thyroid disease, things like rheumatoid arthritis, chronic inflammation throughout the body, increased oxidative stress, and increased neuro inflammation. So what happens in the gut doesn't always stay in the gut. We all heard the phrase, what happens in Vegas stays in the Vegas. What happens in the gut can go all throughout the system. So gut protection is a key, I think, to treatment of most of the neurodegenerative diseases and most of the autoimmune diseases. Endogenous antioxidants can help fight off the oxidative stress. Your body makes antioxidants. It makes glutathione. It makes the key antioxidant called superoxide dismutase. It makes things called catalase and heme oxygenase. These are natural occurring antioxidants that can control oxidative stress. But the problem is there's so many free radicals that from what we bring in from our diets and from the air that we breathe, air pollution, from the microplastics, that we do not have enough to neutralize these free radicals. So often we have to supplement them from outside. If we talk about foods, there's some foods that are high in antioxidants, blueberries, acai berries, some of the green leafy vegetables. But let's use blueberries as an example. It's one of my favorite, and I love blueberries. But in order to neutralize 1 million free radicals, now there's over trillions of free radicals in the body every day from what we bring in. So there's over trillions. But to neutralize 1 million, you would have to eat about 220 pints of blueberries. So obviously you can't do it. Obviously you need something from the outside, an antioxidant. We talk about vitamin C as a great antioxidant. Glutathione, really good antioxidant. Alpha lipoic acid, a good antioxidant. But there are some, and the key one is something called NRF2. It is the master regulator. It is a transcription factor. It's made by the cells, and it can actually turn on the antioxidant genes in the body. It can be turned on. The genetic pathway can be turned on, and it can be turned on by different foods. Broccoli, green tea. There are some foods that can turn on this pathway. It helps improve mitochondrial efficiency. It helps the cells make more cellular energy. It reduces the inflammation inside the body, and it enhances the detoxifying effect of the body. It helps the body get rid of toxins. But it's not about taking antioxidants. It's about activating your body's ability to defend itself. And so that's where one of the companies I work with on their scientific advisory board, they have come up with an NRF2 activator that I think really has been a paradigm shift. It's been out since 2005, but is now really getting a lot of publicity. There's 32 research studies on it. And I think it's really changing the way that we look at things like Parkinson's and some of the autoimmune disease. So why does Parkinson's progress despite treatment? Even with excellent treatment, the oxidative stress damages continue to damage cells. Your mitochondria remains impaired, not producing enough energy. Your proteins still fold, and you get the aggregation within the brain, these Lewy bodies, and inflammation remains active. Now, this doesn't mean that the medications are bad. I think supplementing the body with dopamine is definitely a good thing. It does not mean that patients cause their own disease. It's just we're under attack by everything that we're putting into our bodies. Our lives changed in 1975. Like I said, I was 13, so I began early on eating all the junk food as a kid would do through my college years, through medical school. I definitely ate a lot of junk. Does not mean that there's a cure for some of these diseases, but I think there is disease management. I do not think that supplements replace good neurologic care, but what it does mean, I think it means that we need to expand the conversation beyond just dopamine alone. Here's my idea of a broader role in Parkinson's care. We have the traditional focus, dopamine replacement, control of the symptoms, but then there's an expanded biological focus, reducing oxidative stress, increasing mitochondrial function, supporting mitochondrial function so we have more cellular energy, improving gut integrity, closing off those tight junctions so we do not get the toxins into our body as regularly, and then reducing that overall inflammatory burden. And I think we're seeing it back when I was actively practicing. We were seeing improved symptoms in Parkinson's. In my friend's symptoms went away. Actually, Michael J. Fox has taken some of the supplements that I'm talking about. Um, he actually donated money to one of the companies that I work with. But I think we can control some of these symptoms in Parkinson's and autoimmune disease, even in cancers. So my final empowering message is this: you cannot change the past. You cannot always change your diagnosis, but you can influence the terrain in which the diagnosis operates. You can make your body a bit more hospitable place for your diagnosis to live in. My goal tonight wasn't to sell you anything or replace your doctor. My total goal was to just give you this different framework to look at and explain why I feel, at least, Parkinson's behaves the way that it does. I do have a protocol that I used in patients. I have about 30 other doctors that I work with, I consult with, but I don't actively treat anymore. And if you'd like to get my exact protocol, you'd like to look at some of the research that I was talking about in this on this Zoom tonight. This is my email address. It's my personal email, drjeff@drjeffeffect.com. Send me an email, say, hey, I heard your Zoom. I'd like more of the information on the research. I'd like more information on the specific different supplements that you can use. Like I said, I know we had about 100 people respond to say they wanted to come on. It looks like we have 4 people that came on. So if you know other people that may want to watch the video, have them reach out to me and I'll send them a copy of the video that I'm going to have on my YouTube channel. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you have any specific questions, please direct an email to me. I'd be more than happy to answer them. Once again, I can also refer you to one of the doctors that's in my network. But I think that we can change the outcomes by just controlling our diet, our guts, and then how we control our oxidative stress. I hope you got something out of this. Stay warm and God bless. Bye bye.